9. The Edwards family. Pastor Evan Edwards, his wife Mary, and their adult children Joy and Joshua are a family of ministers from Canada. They were living in Florida when the COVID-19 pandemic broke out and applied for relief funds for their Orlando-based religious charity, falsely claiming that they had nearly 500 employees and a monthly payroll of $2.7 million. The family received $8 million in aid, but soon fell under legal scrutiny as the feds discovered that the accountant who allegedly signed off on the funds hadn't worked for the ministry since 2017 and has dementia. A judge ordered the Edwards family to forfeit their fraudulently obtained paycheck protection loan, and authorities carried out a search warrant on their home, only to find it had been cleaned out. Later that day, police pulled the family over for speeding. They told officers they were on their way to a conference in Texas, but failed to provide specifics about the event. In the car, cops found garbage bags filled with shredded documents, a paper shredder, a laser printer, suitcases filled with financial documents, backpacks containing external hard drives and USB drives, and several Faraday bags, which are designed to block radio frequencies filled with laptops, phones, and other devices. They were taken into custody and charged with filing fraudulent immigration documents, but in an odd turn of events, the charges were dropped and they were released the next day. They still haven't been arrested, and many people are wondering why, including former federal prosecutor Alex Little, who spoke with NBC News. Other people have been prosecuted for much smaller amounts of pandemic-related fraud, and the family's behavior is clearly suspicious, yet no action has been taken to formally charge them. A U.S. attorney spokesperson declined NBC's request for a comment, making the situation even more cryptic and bizarre. Months after the traffic stop, Evan and Josh Edwards have moved back into their home. Nobody's seen Mary or Joy, and their whereabouts are unknown. The investigation into their suspected fraud is ongoing. 8. Richard Shaheen. One morning in July 2013, 52-year-old Karen Shaheen was found stabbed to death in the Homewood, Alabama home she shared with her husband, Pastor Richard Shaheen. Prosecutors charged Richard with murder several months later after discovering evidence of an affair he was having with a man in Europe, whom he allegedly planned to go marry once his wife was dead. They also found text messages Karen had sent after learning of her husband's infidelity, detailing how she'd told Richard that he needed to make a choice about which lifestyle he wanted and stick with it, and that he couldn't have both his marriage and his other relationships. One email that Richard sent to one of his paramours talks about how Karen didn't take good care of her health and that he hoped God would rush her death along so he could be legally single. The story he gave police after Karen's murder was inconsistent, and there was other evidence pointing toward Richard's possible guilt. The case was slated to go to trial in 2017 following a lengthy investigation, but the Alabama Attorney General's office dropped the charges right before the proceedings were scheduled to begin, citing a lack of evidence that they feel is necessary to secure a murder conviction. They dismissed the case without prejudice, which means that they can prosecute Shaheen in the future if more evidence surfaces. Richard was lucky to gain back his freedom and his passport, enabling him to leave the country and leading some to believe that he's gotten away with murder. He's no longer a pastor, and it appears as though he's kept a low profile since the scandalous case came to an unexpected end. 7. Stewart Allen Clark. In early 2021, a pastor from Missouri named Stewart Allen Clark went viral for delivering a disturbingly degrading sermon objectifying women and blaming them for men's poor behavior in relationships. He said that while not every woman can be a trophy wife like Melania Trump, they should at least be a participation trophy. In other words, they should maintain their looks to their husband's level of satisfaction and make sure they're catering to his intimate needs. Clark went on to say that it's essentially okay for a man to cheat on his wife if she's not meeting these standards. He also said that the best way for women to achieve an acceptable degree of attractiveness is to control their weight, and that they should also put down the cupcakes and instead put on makeup. A horrified listener who was tuned into the sermon shared footage of the speech on Facebook, and the clip soon went viral. In response to the overwhelming backlash against the archaic speech, the First General Baptist Church released an apologetic statement saying that Clark's views don't align with the church's values. The pastor soon took a leave of absence and wound up in professional counseling. He announced his intentions to return to the pulpit less than 2 months later in a statement apologizing for his insensitive and unbiblical remarks and acknowledging that he has nobody to blame but himself for the consequences of his behavior. 6. Michael Todd. Earlier this year, footage of megachurch pastor Michael Todd covering a parishioner's face with his saliva went viral. Todd, who preaches for the Tulsa-based Transformation Church, spat into his hand during a sermon about how Jesus restored a blind man's eyesight by rubbing his saliva on the man's eyes. Even members of the devout audience could be heard groaning with shock and disgust as Todd rubbed his hands together and smeared the spit all over the face of a parishioner who was standing beside him with his eyes closed. In addition to being plain old gross, the bizarre display came as COVID-19 infections in Oklahoma were spiking, posing obvious safety concerns. As the clip racked up more than 1.7 million views in a matter of days, and the widespread disapproval of the pastor's theatrics became clear, Todd publicly apologized for his behavior on Twitter. Admitting that the act was disgusting, he said that he's really passionate about giving people hope, and that sometimes it causes him to do extreme things, but that this particular demonstration took away from the message he was trying to convey. The man who received the strange spit bath was identified as Todd's brother, who declined to comment on the incident. Todd reassured his followers that he'd checked on his brother to make sure he was doing okay amid all the unexpected publicity. 5. Craig Duke. When a Methodist pastor in southern Indiana named Craig Duke agreed to appear on the HBO series We're Here, he knew he faced potential backlash from members of his congregation and community. The show, which follows 3 famous drag queens through small-town USA as they invite people to participate in drag performances, aims to inspire LGBTQ+ inclusion and acceptance in places that aren't exactly known for having progressive views. Even though he worried that he might lose his ordination, Pastor Duke decided that appearing and showing his support was worth the risks. He said during the episode that he hoped his participation in the show would serve as a bridge to his admittedly conservative congregation and town. As predicted, Duke began receiving hateful and disapproving emails from members of his church shortly after the episode aired. While he received some support, the overwhelmingly negative reaction to his decision to appear on national TV in a dress, makeup, and a pink wig prompted congregation officials to relieve him of his pastoral duties. In a letter shared with NBC News, Church Superintendent Mitch Gieselman clarified that despite the decision, Duke had not been fired and hadn't resigned. The statement went on to say that he would receive a significantly reduced salary for several months. During that time, he and his family would have to move out of their home, which was provided by the church. The letter also stated that Duke had reached a point where he felt unable to serve in the parish ministry. In an interview with Religion News Service, Duke said that the animosity that his participation in the show generated took a toll on his mental health, and that the conflict over his controversial performance intensified to a point where he could no longer be an effective spiritual leader. 4. David Evans. In March of 2021, 911 dispatchers in Ada, Oklahoma received a frantic call from Christy Evans, claiming that she had awoken to a loud noise and found her husband, David Evans, dead with a gunshot wound to his head. Immediately, it seemed odd that someone would want to kill the well-liked Baptist preacher, and while the community initially responded to Christie's apparent devastation with sympathy, it wasn't long before detectives uncovered some shocking truths about the couple's 30-year marriage that put the 47-year-old at the top of their suspect list. An investigation found that Christie was having an affair with a 26-year-old man named Khalil Demi Square. The two initially met at David's urging for Christie to participate in a threesome. During one of the trio's romps at a motel, Christie slipped Khalil her phone number, and they began corresponding and seeing each other without David's knowledge. She told her illicit lover that David was incredibly controlling, nasty, and abusive, and that he called her disparaging names and pressured her into intimate acts that she didn't want to do. When she said that she wanted a divorce, he allegedly held a gun to his head and threatened to take his own life. The pair hatched a plot to murder David as a way to free Christy from the years of suffering she claimed she'd endured. Christy was convicted of first-degree murder and will be sentenced later this year. She faces the possibility of life without parole, but has said that even in prison, she has more control over her life than she had when David was alive. The couple's daughter, Brittany Long, supported her mother's abuse allegations, telling the Washington Post that her father had always obsessed over Christy's whereabouts and treated her badly behind closed doors while forcing her to act happy in public and on social media. Long said that her mother had told her about the murder before making the 911 call, and that Christy had made peace with knowing that she could end up spending the rest of her life in prison. Square continues to plead not guilty, and a trial date has not yet been set for his case. 3. James Varnell Cusick Jr. In the aftermath of the attacks on the US Capitol in early 2021, federal agents went to the Florida home of a suspect named David John Lesperance, who confessed to being present during the riots. He also admitted that his pastor and the pastor's son were also there, and that they entered the Capitol and took some photos inside. Lesperance avoided naming his co-conspirators, but authorities soon identified the pastor as James Varnell Cusick Jr. and his son as the church's vice president, Casey Cusick. In addition to the details they gleaned from their interview with Lesperance, FBI agents received an anonymous letter detailing evidence of the trio's involvement in the insurrection. Cell phone data put all three men inside the Capitol during the uprising, and their long-standing ties with the church were evident in photos from past congregation events that were posted on Facebook. The suspects were all charged with unlawfully entering or remaining in a restricted building, disorderly or disruptive conduct in a restricted building, and violent entry and disorderly conduct on Capitol grounds. They're among the 76 or more Florida residents who've been arrested in connection with the riots so far, and it appears as though their cases are ongoing. 2. Errol Victor Sr. Hospital staff were trying to revive an unresponsive 8-year-old boy at a Louisiana emergency room in April 2008 when they discovered overwhelming evidence of horrific abuse on his body. He died from his injuries, and suspicion soon turned toward his mother, Tonya Victor, and his stepfather, a prominent local pastor known as Reverend Errol Victor Sr. The couple only stayed at the hospital long enough to tell a nurse that they found the boy slumped over in their bathroom and noticed he wasn't breathing, according to court documents. Staff members caught up with the Reverend in the parking lot and escorted him back inside to question him about the child's injuries. Victor allegedly said that he and his wife had to discipline him for stealing, and said that he took full responsibility for what happened, but refused to answer when asked if he hit his stepson. Authorities charged Errol and Tonya Victor with murder and accused them of beating the boy to death over a 2-day period. Several of the 13 children who lived in the blended family's home reportedly told child service workers that Errol carried out the vast majority of the physical punishment, while Tonya looked on in horror and cried. Errol's biological children from previous relationships refused to speak with investigators. They later pointed the finger at Tonya, claiming that their father never physically abused them and that he wasn't even home at the time. Tonya was convicted of manslaughter and is currently in prison. Errol was convicted of the boy's murder in 2014 in a majority jury vote that was later deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. He was recently granted a new trial and was found guilty, but plans to appeal his conviction. The disgraced pastor continues to maintain his innocence and is receiving considerable support from some community members and a civil advocacy group. Based on the conflicting stories, it's clear that not everyone was truthful in court, making it difficult to say who's truly responsible for the horrific crime. 1. Shannonkatusis. In 2019, 29-year-old Shannonkatusis was working as a youth pastor at the Crossing Church of the Nazarene in Houston, Texas, when allegations of abuse stemming from an incident 4 years earlier came to light. She was indicted by a grand jury on charges of indecency toward a 15-year-old child and was booked into the Fort County Jail on $25,000 bond. Katusis bonded out under the conditions that she surrender her passport and stay at least 500 feet away from the victim's home. Records show that a jury acquitted her and the case was dropped, but the details of why she was let off the hook haven't been released to the public. Thanks for watching. If you walked in on your pastor cheating on their spouse with a parishioner's wife but had no evidence to prove it, would you stay quiet to avoid being alienated from your congregation or call out the affair, knowing that your fellow worshippers might not believe you? Let us know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.